Welcome back, guys. You are watching Comic-Con Africa 2020. Thank you, Mr. Alan Carr. That was amazing. Really enjoyed that chat. And as for you, Zaid, you'll never have my WhatsApp number. Guys, we are moving on now. We are moving to the legendary Kevin Eastman.
Once again, so it is Comic-Con Africa weekend, and of all the things 2020 took away from me, it took away the opportunity to meet like the father of my fandoms. You know, I am a TMNT fan from the time I'm like 4 years old, and COVID took that away from me, but we got you the next best thing. We have got Kevin Eastman here today, and we also have him live on one of the other streams, and I am freaking out. Kevin, how are you?
I'm wonderful, and first off, it's as sad to me as perhaps to you that we are not there with you in person. We understand, we know the situation the world is in, but we love our fans so dearly, and we were so looking forward to coming and spending this time with you. This is, it's the new way things are, but until we do get there, I'm glad to be with you here today. So thanks for having me.
I assure it's my absolute pleasure. Now, Kevin, I'm not going to lie to you. In the course of this interview, I am going to ask you some hot questions. I'm not going to lie. There are going to be some surprise twists and turns, just like the journey you have taken us over the many years that we've had TMNT. And of course, there's just going to be some just general freaking out because, honestly speaking, I think TMNT has been just a major part of many of our fandoms over here. So we're going to get into all of that, and it starts right now. Kevin, I gotta tell you, my journey with Turtles started out one idle Saturday morning and just sitting over there with my Cocoa Pops, and then you just hear that song, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and that's where the journey started for me and many of my friends out there. And I gotta tell you, for you now, all these years later, looking back on the journey and realizing that you have fans literally in every corner of the world, you know, what does that feel like? How does that make you feel, knowing that this is the impact that you have on people?
Well, it's funny. I love that when you brought up the Turtle song. I always think immediately to I love that theme song, and I've actually forgotten until probably about 10 years ago when somebody reminded me that Chuck Lorre wrote that theme song. Two and a Half Men, Big Bang, and I was like, oh my god, because of course we're all huge fans of that material. But no, the thing is surprising because the origin of the Turtles really came from just such a place of purity in that, Peter and I were just big, huge fans of Jack Kirby. He was our idol. We just loved comic books. That was our dream since, we were very young to write and draw our own comics and to become, Jack Kirby or, humbly follow in his footsteps and so many others that we respected. So the fact that the first issue sold at all, and then we started building a fan base that then allowed us to draw comic books for a living. It's just been the greatest gift in that was the dream had really come true when we were waking up every day and drawing comic books. Nothing better, and even lasted a year or 2 years. That was it. The dream is awesome, but the fact that it just kept going as you young fans discovered the cartoon series and the toys, and your poor parents that had to buy all those things for you. Yeah, exactly. Oh my goodness, bless them. But no, it's quite shocking and quite humbling, and it's such a wonderful thing that here we are, basically 36 years plus or minus that the Turtles been around, and it's just the greatest gift ever.
I gotta tell you, like one of the cornerstones of the Turtles franchise as a whole is that with every generation, the core story, stays the same, but it evolved to suit audiences at that point. Because obviously, I was really fortunate a couple of years back for Free Comic Book Day. I think it was like 2009, 2010. Part of Free Comic Book Day was you could get a reprint of Turtles 1, which I'm hoping you'll sign for me when you come to South Africa. Major fanboy. I'm shamelessly just going to throw it out there. But, like when you read that material, obviously, what you and Peter created at that point, It's very, very different from what we saw in the 90s cartoon, and then we had the early 2000s cartoon, where a slightly different version. Then there was the 2007 movie as well. And even now, as we get up to the most recent one, the most recent iteration of it, Rise of the TMNT, from you as, and like I said, like the father of the franchise, knowing that it has this type of longevity, like how Kevin Eastman today, if you could speak back to Kevin Eastman from way back when, knowing what Kevin Eastman today knows, what would you say to Kevin Eastman back then?
Oh man, it's such a great question because it was something that you could never, say for example when the first Turtles cartoons and the first toys came out, and we'd do an interview, and the reporter would be, so you planned this as a toy and a cartoon, you knew this was going to be a big hit, right? And we were like, no, we were a couple of goofball kids, that wanted to draw comic books, and the evolution of it finding its path, because I think launching a toy or a comic property in those days, or even more so today, is like you have a better chance of winning the lottery. It's like going to Vegas. It's like it's either going to happen or not. But then once you get it out there, it really comes down to the fans. Because if you guys, you could plan it and stage it and do all this stuff, but if the fans don't like it, then you're dead on arrival. It doesn't go anywhere. So I think I would say there's nothing really I could say prophetically or something to that Kevin Eastman at that time period. Is just stay true to your heart, stay true to the kinds of stories you want to draw and tell. Be creative, and if you're going to spend the time, and I say this to lots of fans, if you're into music, if you're into sports, you're into writing, you're into comic books, it's all about practice, and you have to practice and hope for the best, because even I feel I was so obsessed with comic books that even if the Turtles didn't work the way they worked, if it was just a one issue and it never went any further, I would still be doing something in comics because that was something that was so near and dear. So I guess it's if you have a dream, don't give up. There are many different paths to accomplishing that dream, but stay true and work hard, and I believe that's the where you'll find success. So.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I love that. I came here to speak to Kevin Eastman about my turtle love, and Kevin Eastman once again gave me something else that's going to shape my life in terms of like stay true to the dream and everything will work out. So just wow. But now, I would be remiss in my duty to all the South African fans out there if I didn't take at least 2 minutes to talk about the last Ronin. 28th October cannot get here fast enough. Like it's like this thing has been pushed back a wee bit, and it's like 2020. But now, the fan speculation is going crazy, and here we have a Turtles fan group, and people are throwing out theories and all that stuff there. But I have to ask one thing, right? And this has been bugging me. I got the chance now. When you guys first created the Turtles, it was almost as though to take the Mickey out of the stuff that was happening in comic books at the time. Now, at this point here, looking at what's going on in the comic book world, can we expect some of that like classic Eastman and Laird kind of stuff over there, or are you guys just like strictly telling a story in that world, or will we see some of the subtle nuances there? I have to ask.
It's a really good question, because it's one of those things. It's much like when I think of the organic path that it took to get to this point, and what I mean by that is really, once IDW started taking on the publishing of the Turtles, and I started working with the incredible Tom Waltz and Bobby Curnow and so many fantastic artists that brought that series to life. And as we were going, 9 years heading towards issue 100, which came out December last year, Tom and I would always talk about what would be the next evolution and what would be the next, where could we go from here? Because it's been such a wonderful and spectacular journey, and we had so much fun. I really feel like that IDW universe is it's kind of like a turtle universe within itself, much like you have the animated universe or the 2000 series or, the different continuities, but IDW is within itself. And I found this story 10 years ago that Peter and I wrote in 1987, and I pulled it out and I started making notes around it of how this idea, which was kind of a beginning, middle, and end of how we could in any way adapt it into not an IDW universe, not a Mirage universe, but closer to the Mirage universe. Sort of, how like when Dark Knight came out, it was a Batman story with every Batman-ism we all loved and grew up with, but it seemed to be a universe within itself. And so when Tom and I started really digging into it, we wanted to pay respect to the original concept that Peter and I wrote at that time, but also update it further because the 1987 story was set 30 years in the future, which was 2017. So we were already like 2 years past that. So we sort of picked, 15, 20 years in the future and set up the same kind of circumstances that we imagined. But it's sort of it's a universe within itself. It's a Dark Knight sort of universe. We, that same heart and soul that you mentioned earlier, like in each of those turtle universes, whether it was a cartoon or Archie or the movies, you still have to have that core family of, 4 turtles, Splinter, April and Casey and stuff. So, but man, it's just been, it's a journey, and it's really been designed and has been written for fans like yourself, fans that have been there from the beginning, and we want to go to that place and have that edge, and we want to have, everything you like about the Turtles, but it's a story for our older fans, specifically and intensely. And I'm literally on the computer right back there. I'm just wrapping up the last couple of pages with Tom, because and I'm sorry to keep carrying on here, but it was for all of us, like, we started work earnestly in January of this year on the series, and like our whole blessed world population, we've all been going through such trying times for everybody, and so there were a lot of stops and starts and stops and starts, and then Andy Kuhn, who was the original artist, just had to step away for a number of reasons. And I love Andy; he's one of my favorite turtle artists, and he just couldn't. There's a lot of issues that he had to step away. So we found 2 artists that had been working. I'd worked with them on Heavy Metal. And the Escosa brothers, and they came in, and I tell you, within the last 6 weeks, we've just been ramping up the way that we had always intended to. So it was difficult, and we feel horrible about the delays, but we love that you guys are hanging tough with us, and we are so close. And knock on wood, I do hope and pray it's going to be the story you're all waiting for, because it's we love it. We're having a really good time with it. So.
That sounds promising to me, and there's 2 things that come out from that. And now, and for everyone out there, I know that we had the script, and to the guys on back in, I know that we had the script, but now, like, I'm in full fanboy mode there, and I'm not going to apologize to Kevin real quick right now, I have to say, right? So, as somebody who dabbles in art myself, you've done a series of variant covers now for the IDW series, and as somebody now for many years who was more on not in the meat and potatoes, as it were, of the actual popping out the deadlines, getting the cover art done, getting all that stuff there. What was that for you now? That experience of okay, right, here we go, classic Kevin Eastman, here we go, because we have noticed, and I know I speak on behalf of the fans, we've noticed that your IDW covers, they have enough of classic Kevin Eastman to be classic Kevin Eastman, but you also evolve your art style as well, so where it's like a new type. So is that a conscious thing that you're doing, where you're drawing and stuff in such a way that it harkens back to your classic work, but still has some of the nuances of your new work, or is that just now it's a new merged style?
No, it's great. As an artist, as you said, if you draw them, that there's an evolution in your styles, and I do feel like, because it's, as an artist, sometimes you feel like, because we're the most abusive to ourselves, so we feel like we have no talent, we can't draw our way out of a paper bag, nothing comes out right, every painting, every drawing's a war, and you're about to throw it away, but then all right, we'll send it in. So you always continually challenge yourself. And now there are lots of isms to the classic, the work that Peter and I did. For a number of years, I was doing storyboards for, comics, and I had not done finished artwork specifically for the Turtles for probably 4, 5, 6 years. until we started working on the, I went back to work on Turtles specifically at IDW and invited me back. So it was really like learning to draw again and figuring out stuff. And much like I mentioned earlier, whatever your passion is, if it is, if it's drawing, writing, music, sports, or whatever, it's like, so now suddenly, I was drawing turtles again, but I was drawing turtles every day. So that was like, 4, 5, 6 hours a day. And, suddenly, 5, 6, 8 years have gone by. And, but it was, so things evolve and you change and you learn new tricks and you try different things and there's new equipment, but it's still, I'm an old school guy with, hands-on. I do my layouts and pencils and inks. The tools have changed a little bit, but it's funny because I feel like that the way I draw is how I draw. I still tell you right now that some of the covers that I've done and I'd be just like, oh, this is terrible, and I want to throw it away. But then you live with it because the images you have in your mind sometimes they don't come out the same way as you put them down on paper. But we do your best. But it was really between the graphic novels and the fill-in issues, and I think I've done about 250 covers since I started work back at IDW, and each one's a challenge, and each one is so much fun to do. And at the end of the day, it's like, the best part is, I wake up, I have my coffee and my bagel, and I come sit over there and I start drawing, and I get to draw every day, and that's the greatest. That's the greatest gift.
Okay, now, I want to shift it up a little bit over here, right? Because as a comic book collector, you tend to watch, one watches the markets and, you see things that are trending up and stuff. I don't know if you're aware, but recently, maybe in the last 2.5 months, I'm not sure whether it's speculation or what's going to be going on in the last Ronin, but like TMNT 1, first print, second print, third print, like those books are trending seriously up in value, So again, as a creator, does that, like, do you look back and think that, okay, once upon a time, a buddy of mine and I have secured a loan from family to get this done. And at this point here, there are people who are prepared to drop on a single issue what we paid for the entire run. Like, what does that feel like, knowing that your work has that sort of impact on people? Like this one specific book, because you must remember, like, fans know, and I mean, it's your life story, right? So, like, obviously, but okay, I need to calm down, hang on. Okay, I'm centered again. I'm sorry, I just get very excited with your life. But it's like for me, I can't imagine what that must feel like, knowing that, holy, this is my stuff, like this is it. So like, what is it, knowing where you were and all the sacrifices you guys had to make, to get that book out, what's it feel like now for you?
Well, it's such a great question because it was one of those things that they made that first issue, 40 pages in a self-contained story because we never thought that there'd be another issue. Again, with the kindness of my Uncle Quentin, who loaned us, the money to print 3,000 copies, was just phenomenal. And again, we at best hoped we could pay him back over a couple of years, but he had the faith. But to that point exactly, so the first issue came out in May of 1984, and then it was sometime early summer of 1984, we got this wonderful letter from a fan named Lawrence Klein, and we still keep in touch to this day. And he said that how much he loved the Turtles, and that him and his father went to, they lived in New York, and they went to a couple different comic conventions until they finally found the first issue, and they paid $25 for issue 1. And we were like, what? Are you kidding me? $25 for a $1.50 comic? We just couldn't believe it. We couldn't believe somebody would pay that much money for this simple, silly idea. And then, as times evolved, and it's now up to what, a couple thousand or more. I've seen some recent issues go for more. But that's insanity, But I love that. I probably, I'd say. I wish I kept more of them. I hate them all away. Most of them all away. But it's like, I was looking at heritage auction sites. I just they do some pretty wild auctions, and I just like to look at what stuff is going for out there, especially the stuff that I still have all my original comic collection. but collectors would be mortified to look at my collection because I read them all when I was a kid, so they're all beat to heck. They're not worth anything because they've been read and they're just terrible condition. But when we see comics as a collectible art form, as a medium in general, those early Spider-Man, Supermans, Batmans, even some more contemporary stuff that I was reading, you know, in the late '60s, early '70s, original art and comics, they're through the roof, and I think that's great. I think it's like, you know, it's I love it. It just says so much about this concept of words and pictures to tell these stories. Comic books now becoming really an art form in many, many ways. I think that's just fantastic for all of us. It says positive things about the future of our business, and as long as, you know, we get to keep making a living at it, then that's even better.
I mean, if you put it, I can't argue with that. But, you know, just for the benefit of the guys out there, right? So, as Kevin's speaking, I just thought, you know, let me just check over here online quickly. Because I track its progress, you know, and you know, for example, there was a private auction, right, or a private sale rather, and a 9.4 copy. So this was a CGC graded one, right? And for those of you who don't know what CGC is, be sure to check out our documentary series on this very platform on how that works. And that went for, according to this report here, $31,000. So now, just to give you a context, right? Like here in South Africa, the exchange rate, like for the rand to the dollar, is about 17, 18, thereabout. So you take, for us, you take 31,000 times by 18, and you're like, okay, you know? So it's like life-changing. You know, but this is the thing, you know, this is the thing. There's a saying, I think everyone knows in the collective world, that something is only worth what a person's prepared to pay for it. And this was, like, I mean, this is all you, man. This is all you. This is how much you mean to the people out there, you know? And I want to share a story with you, if you'll allow me, you know? So when I was a kid, right? So when I was a kid, like turtles, so my parents, right? Okay, wait, sorry, just give me a second. I can't believe I'm speaking to you. Like, this is just something else, right? So I had a VHS tape, right? And it had 6 episodes of Turtles, right? It just had 6 episodes of it. And I was convinced that was all the Turtles, that I knew, and this is like at 4 or 5 years old, and that I knew all of the stuff about Turtles. And then a little while later, I came across the fact that, you know, they were showing on, so that was how you guys would have cable TV. So you could only access it on that. So my dad had gotten someone to tape it for me and all that. Then on how you guys would have public access TV, at some point a little later, you know, they had this, and I was like, wait, there are how many seasons of episodes? I'm like, I know nothing about Turtles, you know? And it was just like, and this is it, you know, Turtles it's the gift that keeps on giving, because it doesn't matter where you fall in the spectrum, which generation you are in, there's something there for you. But now, I think you may need to caution some of the fans here in South Africa, because we'll be having a little bit of an argument among ourselves. I'm gonna clue you in on it, and maybe you can just call some of these guys to order, because they're getting a bit out of hand now, right? So, again, because Turtles is so personal for so many of us, in our collector and our fan journeys, now when you see newer iterations of Turtles, such as Rise of the TMNT, which is very, very, well, I mean, obviously it has the same baseline story, but some of the things about it, you know, some of the themes and whatnot, is very, very different from what a lot of us grew up with. And some fans are just struggling with the thing that, no, it's not true to Turtles. And even when you look at I know it's not the Michael Bay version of it, but you know, the most recent cinematic outing of Turtles, I'm gonna be so bold as to call myself an OG fan, you know, like original gangster fan. I'm not worthy, but I'm just putting myself there. But you know, can you address the guys? Because my view is this: look, Turtles are timeless. You know, it's like how you get the Turtles in time. Turtles are timeless. You know, so this current version, you know, Rise of the TMNT and what we're seeing at the moment, is stuff that, you know, it's to get this version or these new would-be fans to understand the world, just like the rest of us, go back in and see where it's. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Let me ask you, what are your thoughts?
Well, no, it's such a important question that you've asked, and it's very something like, you know, being a fan,
come back in now.
Growing up with similar experiences can address, because
the schedulings have
like,
changed. So the next
when I was
the next one
that was born in 1962. And my first experience with Batman was the Adam West, pow, silly, climbing up the wall. That was doing the dance. And
I don't need to explain that to them.
That's my first experience of Batman, and I liked it because I was a kid. But then, because I also liked comic books, and then I discovered the other side of Batman, this whole other universe. There was this darker side and edgier side, and it was so much more. And say Batman, like Daredevil and Captain America, and a few of those are my favorite. I like the kind of the more rounded superheroes, if you will. But he's always been one of my favorites. And you see how he's evolved, and from Michael Keaton, and everybody was like, Michael Keaton is Batman, but it was Tim Burton, and they were great. And I was like, Val Kilmer and George Clooney, and Joel Schumacher was my favorite.
I don't know why,
Batman
but
stories
lockdown made me watch things. I ended up watching the Taylor Swift documentary.
The later Batman series, Christopher Nolan stuff was fantastic on a lot of levels, because it felt like it was going back to the Batman I really fell in love with, which was the comic book version.
Yeah.
So with the Turtles, as we went through, like you said, because we had the original Black and White Turtle series, which was much edgier and intended. We wrote it for ourselves. It was intended for an older audience. And the kids version, which we also worked on and improved, it was definitely, we knew we were writing it for a much younger audience. To me, and I think you probably agree, is the best Turtle entertainment experience to me was that very first movie, because that first movie was material from the black and white comic books and the cartoon show, but it was written for everybody. So there was material in there for adults, there was material in there for kids, and that was the best. And I've seen different evolutions of Turtles. Some I like better than others. I'll point out like the 2007 Kevin Monroe animated movie. I thought was absolutely fantastic. It was really well done. The most recent Ciro Neely, we call it the 2012 series. Which
Yeah.
I thought it was perfect.
Yeah. Can I just tell you? Sorry, there's one thing that I was just in awe of. In the opening credits of that one, there's so many what do they call them? Sort of like Easter eggs and throwbacks to the 87 series, and also like in the later series, that absolute last, the last shot. It has, your panel of how the turtles pose, And so what I really liked about the 2012 series is that it had so many little nods and Easter eggs to what you guys created. So I'm sorry that was me such.
No. Because see, what's so beautiful about what you just said is that Ciro Neely, who is the executive producer of that series, when he was a kid, he grew up in Philadelphia. His dad owned a pizza place, so he grew up eating pizza, drawing turtles, and loving turtles. So when he got the job as executive producer, creative director on that 2012 series, when I went into the studio, they used to lovingly call me Obi-Wan. They'd have me, I'd come in and see what they're doing and hang out, and they're so fantastic, all these young people that can write and draw better than I do. But they had the old Mirage Studios covers on the walls. They had things that Ciro was really passionate about, putting those little isms in, bringing back characters and reinventing them a little bit, but paying respect to that original series, which I think is why that series was so fantastic. It was really wonderful. But I love that as a fan, you picked up on all that stuff, and that's the coolest thing ever. But it was that was such a really neat series. But it's as we all grew up as fans of things that we loved as a child, even. I loved X-Men comics and Avengers comics, and there'd be some writers and artists that were better than others. Some you liked a little less, some you liked a lot more. I still remember when Frank Miller started writing Daredevil, and it was like the greatest thing ever. But I was already a hardcore Daredevil fan. But so there is an acceptance of change with your characters, and it's personal because we love those characters. So if there's a version we don't like, it's like, if there's a version we like, it's like, yes, like. Daredevil TV series was a Daredevil that I read. That's the one I grew. So, but yeah, I think that when I look to the future of things Turtles, I know Nickelodeon has some plans. I know there's some development with Seth Rogen and a new Turtle concept, which he's a huge comic book fan. I used to bump into him occasionally at Golden Apple Comic Books in LA. So he's a comic book fan, lifelong comic book fan, and a Turtles fan. So, I look forward to, people now that when Seth Rogen was younger, he was a fan like yourself, and now that he's in a position like he will do what Ciro did, is like embrace the things he loved about and tell a new story. So we hope it's everything they want it to be. And people have asked me, what I'd like to see for the next Turtles, evolution of an entertainment thing, and I go to the Daredevil thing we just talked about it. I would just love a Turtles version for the older audiences, like they did Daredevil, and like really edgy, really dramatic. I'm not saying see heads flying off, and but you want to see martial arts like Bruce Lee. We want to see the martial arts that we grew up on. We want to see the intensity. We want to see what the Marvel Cinematic Universe has done and have done so well as they do, edgy, beautifully written and directed and effective stories. And so hopefully we'll that'll be the next experience with Turtles. So we have our fingers crossed. So.
All of us. It's curious. It's curious that even if you look at other disciplines in Turtles, because when you look at the Turtles themselves, the characters, each of them has their own unique personality. And I find that when I was a child, like I got my Raphael over here, right? So it stays in the bags, right? Just to say. So now this is my Raphael. And okay, well, we came with Eastman, and I can take out my Raphael for Kevin Eastman, So, this one over here. So what happened was when I was in primary school, we had, so that's what, like elementary school, you guys would call it, right? So I had, so my Raphael, somebody stole it. And this year was a replacement one. I was like, this doesn't go anyway, But I'm not just showing off you guys, Kevin Eastman, I still got my Turtles. I'm building to a point. Just give me a second, right? I have to caution them. So, but I mean, each turtle, when I was a kid, I identified with Raphael so much because he was cool, but, he was cool, but.
Yeah,
that's the one that was Easter egg for the fans who do this thing. Then, as I went through my, it's just off screen there. But then, in my teenage years, I was a little bit more, a little bit more, more geeky than not. But sort of like the pseudo takeaways and stuff. And then I went through my Donatello phase. I feel like all that my Donatello phase. And then, as I got to high school, you wanted to be the cool guy, the class clown, all that stuff. And then I feel like I went through my Michelangelo phase. And then when I got to university, then I was like, no, you know what? So I started as an attorney, right? So I was like, no, I need to be like formal, like serious and that. And then I went for, to my Leonardo phase, like a leader phase. But now, when I look at all the Turtles together, they put them together, I'm like, you know what? This awesome foursome actually represents an entire person, like a life's journey, And I think that what I would love to see for the next evolution of Turtles is a lot more focus on the personalities and the internal stuff, because that's what the IDW series is doing. When you read those books, the first story arc, and I invite you guys to check out on the exhibitors tab, all the exhibitors are having crazy specials. See if you can get the graphic novels, because coming across the single issues is hard. But I mean, just the whole thing, the fact that the original Turtles all had the red bandanas, and in that story, in that world, in the IDW world, they actually gave context to that Raphael went missing. It's not a spoiler, you guys. If you haven't read by now, you So, and next week was to remember him. And just the way they tied all that in, there's so much of subtle nuances in it. And I just really, really hope that we get to see that. But now, that there was my not so smooth segue into the next question, right? Now, I want to take you back a wee bit. I want to take you way back a wee bit into the mid-80s, and where these two dudes hanging out, Kevin Eastman, Peter Laird, and they were basically doing a deconstruction of the comic book industry at that point. Now, I would want to ask, right? And remember, you guys tackle certain tropes over there, about like all these over-the-top, heroes. Because at that point there, you had these anti-hero characters, and you guys really, took the mickey out of that really in its own way. Nowadays, some of the tropes that I notice in comic books is, you always have the annual big event. There has to be like where the whole brouhaha where everyone is over there. And then you have dark versions from parallel universes of the characters. I'm talking about the Batman, etc., etc. So if Kevin Eastman from way back then, right, had to be sitting in this Kevin Eastman's studio chair, around that laptop in the corner right now, what do you think he would dissect in the comic book world right now? So what would you, if you had to write Turtles 1 today, what would you dissect?
Well, that's a really good question, because it really is, it's and I've I'm laughing because I was going back, and I was a huge fan of Jack Kirby's Commandy. It was one of my favorite things, and I think that's where a lot of Turtles, the mutant animal aspect, came from, as well as when I was a child, the first movie I ever saw in a movie theater was Planet of the Apes. So it was sort of like apes running the world, and Jack Kirby's Commandy was all the animals were like the things, and the humans were, you know, the animals. It was just, I loved it. It was like I lived in this tiny little town, and and so the Turtles and how they evolved, the timeliness of how they evolved was the perfect storm for that time period. It was Frank Miller's Ninjas. There was animal comics like Cerebus and Commandy. There were, you know, we had X-Men, Fantastic Four, you had superhero groups, and so we sort of picked or heavily borrowed all of our favorite ideas and kind of put them into a blender, and out came the Turtles. And you look at, if you look at a timeline sort of back to underground comic books in the late 60s and 70s were because these guys wanted to tell comic stories for adults, and they couldn't get jobs at Marvel. Marvel was under Comics Code Authority, so they had to keep comics for kids. And then all the little isms that, you know, grew up and out of the Marvel universe, and as things became, you know, darker and edgier, and the world flattened a little bit, we got exposed to European comic books and manga and so many things. There were so many influences. So I feel like to retell or recreate the Turtles today, it would be very hard because there's so many incredibly great ideas out there. There's so many things that we'd be interested in, and things that we would be pop culture fans of to sort of spin into a new Turtle universe. And I think it'd be hard pressed to see the Turtles succeed. I think they succeeded when they did because the timeliness, and it was something that landed right directly with you. You discovered it. It's like discovering a rock band or something that you know, the first time you heard music that you really loved, and that you claimed it, you owned it, that was yours for life. So yeah, but what's interesting though is some of the stuff that we're doing in the stories that we're telling now in the ongoing Turtle universe are kind of reflective of what's going on in our world today. What's influences that we're seeing on so many different levels, not only entertainment, but, you know, globally